This video describes the production of these oval-shaped boxes. This video is a continuation of the previous video in which I made some segmented oval-shaped rings using the Accu-Slice system. In this video I took those segmented oval-shaped rings and I turned them into some finished boxes. So this video describing all the processes I used to make the tops and bottoms, cutting off the top sections on the bandsaw, making my lip that it lines up with the box on the bottom very nicely, finishing these with the polyurethane finishing system, and then at the very end of the video I did something a little bit different. I described what I would do differently if I was to make these in the future. There's always ways to improve my projects, doing things different, and I'll describe some of my ideas at the end of this video. I have a piece of honey locust here, some scrap wood, and I think I can get some pieces out of here to make the tops and bottoms for one of these oval-shaped bowls. So let me try cutting some 100,000 inch thick pieces. I also have something new that I'm using here for the first time. This is an air line which will blow air along the back side of the bandsaw blade. And the idea is to, number one, to blow the sawdust away from the bandsaw blade, but it also cools the blade, so it should run cooler, so it should cause the blade to last longer. So let me turn my air supply on. I'll be describing this more fully in a future video. This was a scrap piece of honey locust left from a previous project, and a lot of knots and bad parts in the wood, but it's just enough good area to get the oval disc for this project. So I should get the boards I need for this project out of these pieces. This next board I'm cutting is some catalogs. It's a small piece of catalogs for the oval-shaped bowl that I'm making. And again, I'll be slicing some boards off 100,000 inch thick. The cutting of these boards is sped up 10 times the actual cutting speed, just for viewing purposes. And I'm using a Timberwolf blade, 1/2 inch wide, 8 teeth per inch. So I'm be cutting some oval-shaped pieces out of this for the oval-shaped segmented boxes I'm working on. So next I'm just slicing these pieces around on the bandsaw. And skipping the bad wood, I should get just enough to make, well, I actually made these about 1/4 inch oversized, so I actually have a little more than I show in here. So next I'll be gluing 2 layers together. I have my honey locust on top and then a piece of maple underneath, running with the grains running opposite direction again for strength. And I'll be gluing those 2 together to make a board. And I already completed these 2. This is my walnut box. And I actually made 3 layers for this. I have a piece of maple in the center of 2 pieces of walnut. I did that for both the top and the bottom. So I'll go on those like that. That's ready all ready to glue up actually now. And then another one of these boxes where again I have maple on a piece of my wangi wood. And again that'll go on top and bottom again. So that's right, those are both ready to glue up. These are the pieces I just cut. So again I have my catalogs. I'll be gluing that to a piece of maple, and my honey locust gluing that to a piece of maple. So let me start with the catalogs here first. All I do is I just put glue on both surfaces and I'll put it in my press and let it dry for a couple hours. I take the 2 pieces of wood to my wood press and clamp them together between 2 pieces of wax paper and 2 larger pieces of MDF. And let that dry for at least an hour. An hour to set and maybe 2 hours to dry. And I repeat that process on this remaining boards. And these pieces have been drying now by about 3-4 hours. So now I'm ready to start gluing up the top and bottom. So let me start on this. I then place a single bead of glue around the box frame and smooth it out. And then put this on the one piece of wood lid, and then use some large clamps to clamp it in place. These spring clamps were pretty good, but I didn't have enough of those, so I used some small bar clamps I had to get some additional pressure. Making sure that I have nice tight fit and there's no gaps in the finished joint. Okay, let that dry for a while. And while one's drying, I'll glue up the other one. I'm using the same process to apply the bead of glue around the box frame, but trying to be careful not to put too much glue on the surface. Because when you put the glue on, as you can see here, the glue does run out, there's excess, and that can either be wiped off now or needs to be wiped off or scraped off later. But you need to remove that excess glue, especially from the inside where the lid's going to be attached in the future. Okay, next I'm gluing on the other side, and then after that's done and dried, I'll take it to my edge sander and sand off the excess lid and bottom. Go ahead and glue on this other side. After the gluing and clamping is complete, I allow this to dry for at least 3-4 hours before proceeding to the next step. After the box is dried for at least 3-4 hours, I take it to my edge sander to sand off the excess wood from the top and bottom. I made these woods extra large just because of allowing for slipping and sliding during the gluing process, but now that excess wood has to be cut off and made flush with the sides of the box. And this is the finished wood box with the top and bottom sanded flush with the sides. And you can see that nice white maple insert strip on the top and bottom showing up quite nicely. In the same manner, I sand the remaining boxes on this edge sander. Notice on the edge sander I'm using gloves. I've had 2 accidents with this edge sander over the years, so I'm very careful now. You easily pull your hand on that and it cuts pretty quickly, so I do like using gloves, even though gloves normally aren't recommended when using power equipment. And this is another finished box showing the double layer top and bottoms. Now here's my 7 oval boxes. They've all been sanded flush on the sides for the top and bottom moldings. And now I need to do a bunch of hand sanding to get these all ready. And after the hand sanding is done, then I'll cut the lids off. I just finished sanding these. I sanded them first of all with 220 and then 320, and I used one of these hand disc sanders to sand them, and they came out pretty good. But I'm going to try something a little bit different. I'm going to try putting some moldings on the top surface of these. So let me go to the router and we'll give that a try. I'm using my table router to produce the moldings for these boxes. The router bit has a roller bearing on the top of the router bit to control the width of the molding cut, and the height of the router from the tabletop surface determines the depth of the molding cut. And this is the finished molding cut. Gives a nice detail to the piece. I'm actually using 2 points of contact to control the cutting using the router table. I'm first pushing the box against the front edge of the router fence, and at the same time pushing the box against the roller bearing on the router bit. This provides for a nice smooth finish of the molding. Okay, I'm going to do one thing more on the bottom. Instead of having this sharp edge, I'm just going to take round the corner off a little bit. So I lowered my cutter just enough to take the bottom edge off. So let's give that a try. I'm just rounding off the bottom edge of the box very slightly, just enough that I don't have a sharp edge and there's no chance of splintering of the wood strips on the end. And this is the finished edge rounded bottom. Well, I just put a molding on the top of these, and I put 2 different moldings on. On these couple here I put a smaller molding, on these bigger ones I put a larger molding. But it's a delicate molding, just enough to round off the top and give a little bit of a lip on this top piece. So now I'm ready to cut off the tops. But it is it's Saturday night. It's actually 12:30 in the morning, so I'm going to call it quits for tonight, and I'll cut these tops off on Monday morning. In our previous video, we showed cutting the lids off our boxes by using some double-sided tape and then just sticking them to a sacrificial fence on the Accu-Slice carriage and then slicing them off. But this is a system I made a few years ago using the offset cam clamps from our website. And it consists of a flat plate with a track, and my offset cam rides in the track. And there's two of these down here which can hold a circular item. It was actually designed for a segmented disc, but it works fine with these segmented boxes. Just put the box on there and then tighten the clamp, and that holds it on the fence to cut off the lid. And this works good for a one-off, cutting of an item like a disc or a box in this case. Let me go ahead and mount this on my system and move my fence in. And let me cut a lid off in this first box. And this works much nicer than the double-sided tape, because to release the block, and that's all there is to it. And there's our resulting lidded box. But you can see how much faster and easier it is to add and remove items from the bandsaw. So to make sure it's tight against the board when you clamp it down. Make sure the clamp doesn't pull it away. So just double check, make sure it's tight. I'll show you how this actually works. I have two cleats here that trap my piece and hold it. They're like a 1/4 inch thick, this pieces of wood. And my offset cam is in this channel here, and it's held with this brass screw that goes up and down. So all I do is put my item to be held against there and adjust my height. And I like, rather than having a clamp over, I like clamping over on this side. And then so just adjust it until I have a little, maybe a 1/4 turn of movement. And then I can lock this and then just lock it like that. Again, making sure it's tight against the fence, because sometimes the clamp might pull it out a little bit. So just make sure it's tight against the MDF board here, and then tighten the clamp. The advantage of cutting your box lids by doing this technique, by making a solid box and cutting the lid off, is the lid is a perfect fit. Well, I cut the lids off all these boxes. Now I have to do a bunch more sanding. I had to sand the moldings I put on these boxes, and sand the lids a little bit, and get them all ready to finish. And these will probably be Christmas gifts for some relatives. And when I do that, I'll be doing something like maybe putting some initials on, like this, which I've done on some other projects such as this. Put these raised initials on there. These are just Old English style text that I cut on my scroll saw. And it creates a nice presentation. Or I may do something like I have these inlay strips that I made previously. That could be, cut a thin strip and put an inlay or put on the top, something like that. So that's another possibility. So I'll probably do something different, towards the end after I decide who these are going to, for gifts. I just spent several hours sanding these, sanding the outside, sanding the molding, and then also removing the glue from around this inside edge, because I got to put my strips in there. That's the next step, is to glue these strips inside the lid so that they, fit on top and lock into my boxes. So that's the next step, to put those rims on. And so I've cut a bunch of strips here. These are 80,000 inch thick. This was all cut on the Accu-Slice system. So they're 80,000 inch thick by about a 1/2 inch wide. And let me start with this one. So it'll be going around in here like this. So I got my bending iron set. It's set to about 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And in order to do this, the pieces will have to be wet. So Everything's wet first and then I bend it on the iron. I use a spray mister to wet both sides of the strips. And I usually start in the middle. Most of the section on bending the wood strips is shown at 10 times the actual speed for viewing purposes. The process of bending the wood strips can be quite time consuming. You must take your time and be careful as to not to bend the wood strips excessively and cause the wood strips to crack or split out. This requires repeated wetting of the wood strips and rebending on the heating iron by applying light pressure to form the wood strips to required shape but not overextending the strips. I go back and forth between the heating iron and the box lid to check the fit for the required shape, and then bend the wood strips to get a near perfect fit. Notice that I'm wearing a thick glove on my left hand. The bending iron can be quite hot. It can cause burns. So I use the glove to enable me to bend the wood strips close to the ends and also close to the heating iron. The shape of the bent wood strip is now getting closer to the required shape, so I need to cut the wood strip close to the required length. I mark the length of the wood strip inside the box lid and allow for a 1/2 inch overlap. I then use a small veneer saw to cut off the excess wood strip. I continue bending the wood strip to get a better fit. I then use some small clamps to clamp the wood strip inside the box lid. The purpose of this clamping is to determine the exact length of the bent wood strip. I want to end up with a very precise cut that will have no gap between the ends of the wood strip when it's finally glued inside the box. I then mark the length of the board and then once again cut this excess wood off using the small veneer saw. And then place the wood strip back inside the box lid and check for the correct alignment. And the small clamps can be reapplied to the wood strip to force it into its exact position to check for the final alignment of the ends of the wood strip. If necessary, I trim off the ends once again of the wood strip and use a file to square off the edges, and then do a final fit. I then end up with a near perfect joint between the two ends of the wood strip. Next, I clean up the glue joint between the top of the lid and the frame to make sure there's no glue in that corner. And I'm using a small triangular shaped file to clean out that edge. I could also use a chisel, but this triangular file works pretty well. And I then do a final fit to make sure the wood strip fits tight down against the lid of the box. We're now ready for glue up. I'm using Titebond 3 glue again. I'm using a small round applicator stick just to put a small bead of glue around that inside corner between the lid and the frame. And then insert the wood strip and use my clamps once again to clamp it tight against the sides of the frame. And I actually use clamps in two directions. I'm using these clamps to clamp it against the frame. Then I use some additional clamps to force it down, to force the wood piece down against the top. And there's my finished glued up insert for the lid. I'll let that dry for at least 3 or 4 hours. In the same manner, I'll do the remaining lids for the other boxes. Notice a nice tight joint at the end of the two wood strips. Well, I just finished coating these boxes with polyurethane, and normally I just use these wipe-on polyurethane. I like using the wipe-on polyurethane because it's thin. You put it on with a clean rag, and it doesn't run on the ends because it's so thin. But buying thin is another problem. That buying thin doesn't fill the pores of the wood. And these woods, especially this honey locust and this wenge, are really open porous woods. So I had to do things a little bit differently. So this is the honey locust board, and it has a ton of open grain. It's really one of the worst grains I've seen for being an open grain. So I did a couple things. First of all, I used this Accu coat. I used one coat of that to try and fill the pores. I only used one coat. I probably should have used 2 or 3 because it didn't seem to do that well of a job. So after that, I started coating it with the brush-on polyurethane. So I put a coat of this brush-on polyurethane, then I sanded it with 220 grit sandpaper. I repeated that 2 more times, so a total of 3 times with the brush-on polyurethane and sanding it with 220 grit after each coat. Then I did a 4th and final coat of the brush-on polyurethane, and I sanded that down with 320 grit sandpaper. After that, I went to my wipe-on poly, and I did probably about 8 coats of this total as a final finish. After the first 3 coats, I sanded it down with 600 grit sandpaper, and then the final 3 coats is the result right here. So this hasn't been sanded at all. So I think they're finally finished, but it took a lot of work to fill the pores of this wood. But they're filled good now. I got nice, smooth, flat finish on the honey locust and the wangi, the maple and the Cadillacs. They came out fine. They're really good. This walnut's even an open grain, but that came out good. And these are still on the my painting jigs because I just finished these last night, and now I'm ready to finish them. Okay, I'm ready to put the inserts, these felt inserts, into my boxes. And so what I did before I started, I made some patterns. I just traced the inside pattern of each of these blocks before I put the tops and bottoms on, and that gives me my pattern. And then I put this on some felt and traced around my pattern, cut it to the line, and now I'm ready to glue it in. And so the first thing, I check it for fit, make sure it's pretty good. And then again, you can use any glue. Again, I'm using Type Bond 3 because I have it here. And just coat the glue on the surface of the board. And I usually let it set for a few minutes till the glue sets up a little bit before I actually put the felt in. And I'll let that set for a little bit before I actually put the felt in. Here's one that's completed already. And this is my finished box. On the bottom, I could put some cork on something on the bottom, or even a piece of felt, but I think I'll leave it as it is. And my top fits on quite nicely. And there's my finished box. In a like manner, I add felt liners to the remaining boxes. Well, this completes this video on the production of these 7 oval-shaped segmented boxes. And I want to do something a little bit different at the end of this video. I want to give some ideas what I would do different if I was to make these over, because you can always make improvements when you do things, a second and third time. Let me go through a few ideas that I have to make these bowls better. One of the first things is making these bowls thinner. Some of these segments are pretty thick. This is a pretty heavy bowl for the size of the bowl. And this could have been made thinner either by using thinner segments or sanding it or cutting it thinner. So that one's pretty thick. This one's much thinner. I like this one much better because it is thinner. So that's the first change I'd probably make in the future, doing that, is making those segments thinner. The next thing I think I'd do is I make multiple layers for the tops and bottoms. I made 2 layers in most cases, each about 1/16 of an inch thick. But I could have put, 3 or more layers of this and make this top segment actually thicker, and then put a larger molding on, and then this highlighted band would have stood out much nicer by having a wider molding on that. So that's what I'd probably make that change, is just putting maybe 3 layers, maybe a dark, white, dark, and then making the segment layer also thicker, the bottom layer, and then putting a larger molding on to show more detail. So that's probably the second change I would make in the process. As far as finishing it, I probably should have used more of the wood filler to fill up the grain, because these honey locust was really porous wood, and I spent a lot of time trying to fill those pores. So Filling out with a wood filler, multiple coats probably would have been a better option to do that. So next time I'll probably use maybe 3 coats of wood filler, and then use less of the other finishes. But the brush on poly did do a better job filling the pores, and then I did use the wipe on poly to do my final finish, which came out pretty good. And I put that finish on just with a rag, I use one of these dust-free lint cloths to apply the wipe on varnish. The other thing I mentioned, making a thinner top segment. This top segment where I cut the top off probably should have been a little bit thicker, to give it more support. If perchance this board might start warping, this segmented piece would give more support. So right now it's less than a 1/4 inch thick, and I think it would have been better if it had been a little bit thicker. So that could be changed in the future. But so far they're not warping; they seem to be pretty good. I did use 2 layers. I used a sheet of wangi in this case, and then a sheet of maple underneath, which runs in opposite directions. So this grain ran in this direction, and the second layer ran in the opposite direction. So that gave good strength to it, but it still could warp. The other thing, I think I like these solid pieces better than these, striped pieces. Making all out of the same wood, such as this one right here, or this walnut one here. Again, I think I like the solid woods better than these striped pieces. But that's just my personal preference. One of the things to be done at the end, I could put some felt or some cork on the bottom, because it's going to get scratched just using it as it is. So probably a cork or a felt bottom would have been good for these boxes. This concludes this video on making these segmented oval-shaped boxes using the Accu-Slice system. I hope it was informative. I learned a few things in making these. There's always new things to learn and new things to do. I'm always trying to make new ideas and new projects with my Accu-Slice system. So once again, thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, please give us a call or drop us an email. We're always happy to hear from you. To finish this video, I'm showing close-ups of each of the oval-shaped segmented boxes. This first box is made from padauk and maple with honey locust top and bottom. This second box is also the same padauk and maple with the honey locust top and bottom, just a little bit different size. This next box is made from catalogs, both the sides and top, and the maple inlaid strip. It gives a nice detail to the project. And this box is made from walnut, wood on both the top and the bottom, and also on the sides, with the maple detail strip. This box is made from honey locust, both on top, bottom, and the sides, and honey locust gives a nice grain pattern. And these final 2 boxes are made from wangi wood on the top and bottom, and that's catalogs and maple on the sides. Once again, thank you for watching this video, and good luck with your future projects.